Modern America. Part 2. And this time, it's personal. It's game time, folks. It's game time part 2. Game time part 1 didn't work so well. We got knocked on the canvas. But now this is our time. You need to take out that piece of paper your teacher has provided with you. The one that has all the blanks on it. You are going to watch this video and text is going to come flying in the screen. And the text that is read, you are going to write down. Write what is read. And you're going to make the most premium study guide you've ever seen in your life. You're going to take that study guide. You're going to make note cards from it. You're going to study those note cards. And then you will be ready for round 2 of the last test of the school year. Let's get going. Let's talk some presidents real quick. Let's first talk about Ronald Reagan, the president of the 1980s. Ronald Reagan, Cold War president, looks at Mikhail Gorbachev and he says,
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
What wall is he talking about? He's talking about the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall, which restricts movement of people. You see, what he's doing is he is challenging the, write this in, moral legitimacy of the Soviet Union. Challenge them as a moral country, or as an immoral country, the evil empire, for even having the Berlin Wall. That's why he says, Mr. Gorbachev, write this in, tear down this wall. Reagan wants to tear down the Soviet Union, and he's got a strategy to do it. Number two. Reagan increased U.S. military and economic pressure on the Soviet Union. Alright, so here's what this means. The military got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And the Soviet Union had to have a bigger military too, because this is an arms race. You're not fighting directly. The way you fight is who has more nuclear bombs, who has a bigger military. So anyway, so the Soviet Union, they go, they build up, but they don't have the economic power that the United States does. They can't afford a massive military buildup. So it hurts them economically as they're trying to catch up militarily. And that's how Reagan puts pressure on the Soviet Union, helping lead to their collapse. Now, let's talk about Reagan, not Cold War. Let's talk about him here in the United States, his conservative policies. Let me play you a Reagan quote. Remember this quote.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
That's the quote of a Reagan conservative. Here's what we're talking about. Reagan was a popular conservative Republican who sparked the Reagan Revolution, which was based off a bunch of stuff. It was based off cutting taxes. That's number 1. So you're reducing the size of government by not spending all your money on government taxes. The transfer of responsibilities to state governments. That local governments are better than the big national government. Reagan is anti-big government. You ready for a lot of stuff? Woo! There's a lot of stuff. The appointment of judges and justices who exercise judicial restraint. Now what that means is, if you remember a right to privacy, not written in the Constitution, but it's the idea that women have the right to abortion. Controversial, especially conservative Republicans who tend to be more pro-life, not pro-choice, more anti-abortion, would say that should never have been created in the first place. It's not your job to increase all these rights that aren't written in the Constitution. Restrain yourself, judges. That's judicial restraint. The reduction in the number and the scope of government programs and regulations. Remember, Reagan, reduce. Reagan, reduce. Make government smaller. And the strengthening of the American military. Now, his revolution was mighty popular, so that even when he stops becoming president, there's an impact. The Reagan Revolution extended beyond his tenure of office with the election of his vice president, George H.W. Bush, and then the election of a centrist Democrat, meaning a moderate Democrat, Bill Clinton. Also, the Republicans swept the congressional elections and the state houses in the 1990s. And then, after Bill Clinton was president, comes the election of George W. Bush, who was a Republican. So you see the impact of the Reagan Revolution. As Vice President H.W. Bush, then a moderate Democrat, then the Republicans taken over, then George W. Bush, a Republican. It was a great impact indeed. All right, how did the Cold War end? Here we go. A major reason for the collapse of the Soviet Union was many internal problems within the USSR. Do you remember how we said that Reagan was applying military and economic pressure? Well, this increasing Soviet military expenses to compete with the United States crippled the economy of the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union's economy is in trouble trying to keep up with the United States of America. Now, Mikhail Gorbachev, who was the premier of the Soviet Union at that time, comes up with two big reforms to try to fix the problems of the Soviet Union. These fast-paced reforms, however, did not fix economic inefficiency. The first one was glasnost, political openness. This means more freedom of speech, more freedom of the press. And then the next one was perestroika, economic restructuring, a little bit of capitalism. Not a lot of capitalism, but just a little bit. What happened is that people took these and they wanted more. It's kind of like if you give a dog a little bit of the food, they just want more food. They're never satisfied. By the way, I know what you're thinking. How am I supposed to ever remember this? Don't you worry, because I just thought of a premium way for us to always remember this. Glasnost, openness, like glass. Have you ever looked at glass? It looks open, right? It doesn't look closed off to you because it's clear. Glass is clear. Glass is open. Openness. Perestroika. Guys, I want you to look at my cursor right here. You can see it's right here. R-E-S-T-R. Restra. Economic restructuring. Restra. Number 7, rising nationalism. The Soviet Union also contributed to the end of the Cold War. So what I'm telling you is that as these reforms were put into place, then comes more nationalism. This is important to remember. If you're ever seeing a cause and effect or an ordering question, see glasnost, see perestroika, then look for rising nationalism because it gets more intense as the people get a little bit of reforms. They just want more. So the Soviet Union fell apart in the early 1990s. The big enemy of the United States throughout the 20th century is gone. So what does the United States do after the Cold War? Well, after the Cold War, the U.S. has utilized foreign and humanitarian aid, as well as has supported human rights throughout the globe. Foreign aid, humanitarian aid, supported human rights throughout the globe. New president, let's talk about George H.W. Bush, president from 89 and 93. The Cold War came to an end during the presidency of George H.W. Bush. It is a mistake to think it came to an end during Reagan's presidency. Reagan left, Bush is in office, then the Soviet Union collapsed, then communism collapses. Communism falls in Eastern Europe. Germany was reunited. There was no more East Germany and West Germany. There's just Germany. And the gigantic communist country of Yugoslavia collapsed. And then the Soviet state was officially broken up. So we got Eastern Europe, Germany reunited, Yugoslavia collapsed, and the Soviet state was broken up. All of this happened during the presidency of George H.W. Bush. Now, George H.W. Bush's big war wasn't actually a Cold War battle. It was the Persian Gulf War. This says George W. Bush, guys. It should say George H.W. Bush. Ignore that. George H.W. Bush was president during the Persian Gulf War of 1990 to 1991, also called Operation Desert Storm. Saddam Hussein, Iraq, was removed from Kuwait. So what happened was Saddam Hussein, a brutal dictator of Iraq, invaded oil-rich Kuwait. The United States intervened along with other countries, but it was mostly led by the United States to remove Saddam Hussein from Kuwait. The United States did this very quickly, and it was a gigantic military victory. Interesting fact, it was the first war where American women served in a combat role, and this is primarily through the air, through aircraft, female fighter pilots who fought in the Persian Gulf War. George H.W. Bush is out of office. The next president is William Jefferson Clinton. Bill Clinton, president from 89. Nope, not from 89-93, from 93 to 2001. Excuse me for that error. During the presidency of Bill Clinton, the North American Free Trade Agreement was passed. The North American Free Trade Agreement, also called NAFTA, N-A-F-T-A. What did it do? It established free trade between Canada, Mexico, and the United States, the major countries in North America. Canada, Mexico, and the United States now have free trade. There's no tariffs between this. There's no free trade barriers. But the issue with this is, let's say you got business right here in Virginia. You might outsource your jobs, do some offshoring, have the work done in Mexico, and then brought back to the United States. That means less jobs for Americans. That is often a criticism of NAFTA. Three big things also that happened during Bill Clinton's presidency. Saw a restoration of full diplomatic relations with Vietnam. Vietnam, our enemy from the Vietnam War, now an economic trading partner. Also, the lifting of economic sanctions against South Africa for ending apartheid. Apartheid was South Africa's Jim Crow laws. Apartheid was their form of legalized segregation. South Africa got rid of apartheid when they elected Nelson Mandela as president, and so Bill Clinton said no more economic penalties, no more economic sanctions against you for getting rid of apartheid. And there was NATO action in the former Yugoslavia to try to stop a genocide from happening. NATO warplanes in 1998 bombed in the former Yugoslavia. Bill Clinton, out of office. Next president, George W. Bush. George W. Bush is elected president, and almost immediately in his presidency, a dramatic event occurs. On September 11th, please write in September 11th, 2001, Al-Qaeda terrorists attacked the United States of America. They attacked the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and a plane that was hijacked and crashed in a field in western Pennsylvania. Now, the United States response to 9/11 was more security at home. They passed the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act is like a countrywide, it's actually kind of a worldwide, but especially in the United States, a countrywide search warrant that if there's a case involving terrorism, you don't need to go to a judge to get a search warrant. You can wiretap, you can take cell phone records, you can get any data you want as long as it's a terrorist case. Now, a lot of Americans say, this is great. I don't want any more terrorism. Go ahead, take records, take it all. I'd love for you to make sure that I'm safe. Other Americans say, this violates my right of protection against search and seizure. This violates my rights enumerated in the Constitution. So the Patriot Act is very controversial, but it was to show heightened security at home. Now, after 9/11, the United States is engaged in diplomatic and military initiatives. Please note diplomatic. It's unfair to say that the United States has just fought all these wars all by itself. Many nations have joined coalitions in fighting these wars. These military initiatives have taken place in Iraq, like Persian Gulf War, same area, just this time over terrorism, and in Afghanistan. Currently, a major issue is the United States' involvement in the war on terrorism. Immigration in the United States has increased from many diverse areas, but there's two really big areas, especially from Asia and especially from Latin American countries. Now, why are these immigrants coming to the United States? Well, there's two main reasons for immigration: political freedom and economic opportunity. My gosh, those are the two big reasons for immigrants coming over here, all the way back to like 1607 stuff. You know what I mean? A very, very long time. What are issues related to immigration? Now remember, there's legal immigration and then there's illegal immigration, and these can create big issues. Well, issues related to immigration policy include the strain on government services that illegal immigrants create. Filling low-paying jobs in the United States. Someone's got to work those jobs, and new immigrants to the countries are often the ones that do. Border issues. The border of the United States, especially with Mexico, is not very secure in all areas. How do you do that? That's a border issue discussion. What about pathway to citizenship? Do you offer citizenship opportunities for illegal immigrants? Bilingual education. Should immigrants be educated only in English, or should there be bilingual education? Since 1968, bilingual education laws have been in place in the United States of America. And increasing cultural diversity. What are some contributions of immigrants in the United States? They include diversity in music, visual arts, and literature, and an expanded role in the labor force and achievements in science and engineering. So they bring diversity, they bring an expanded role in the labor source and achievements in science and engineering. Last topic, technological advances. My gosh, we live in a technological society, do we not? Over the past 3 decades, improved technology and media have brought about better access to communication and information for businesses and individuals in both urban and rural areas. Look no further than the satellite dish. You don't have to make hardwired cable connections from one house to another. You can access television programming by satellite. As a result, many more Americans have access to global information and viewpoints because of technological changes. What are these recent technological changes doing to our society? Well, they include the prevalence of telecommuting, online coursework, the growth of service industries, breakthroughs in medical research, and outsourcing and offshoring. So right in telecommuting, very important, working from home because technology allows you to do so, and outsourcing and offshoring. Because the world is a smaller place, you can have stuff made overseas. Overseas is always offshoring. Outsourcing means in another location. But we can use them interchangeably because we're talking about jobs in America that are being lost because of outsourcing and offshoring. We're also talking about more economic productivity because of the benefits of outsourcing and offshoring. Confusing issue, confusing times we live in, debates for you to settle in your lifetime.